For so many people, faith isn't just a belief system. It's really the bedrock of their identity.
Absolutely. It shapes everything: values, community, how you see the world.
But what happens when your deepest sense of self, who you feel you are, seems to, well, clash with those core teachings?
That's a tough spot to be in.
Exactly. So today, we're diving into that connection with faith, specifically when it intersects with cross-dressing or, expressing femininity in ways that maybe don't fit traditional gender roles. And for many, this collision point, it sparks a lot of conflict, fear, even shame.
It really can.
So the big question for this deep dive is, can you genuinely live authentically as a cross-dresser and still honor your faith? Is there a place for growth, a home within those religious traditions?
It's such a complex area we're exploring, this intersection of identity and spiritual doctrine. It's often quite painful. It's not just about the challenges. We're also looking at the paths people are finding towards, well, reconciliation. And there's actually a growing sense of hope there.
Okay, so let's start with that internal world. The sources we looked at describe this really profound struggle for cross-dressers raised in religious homes.
Yeah, like a psychological and spiritual tug of war. That phrase really captures it.
It does. On one side, you've got the truth of who they feel they are inside, and on the other, these often very rigid teachings about what's acceptable, especially in more conservative or traditional faiths. Christianity, Islam, Orthodox Judaism.
Right, where gender roles are often presented as, divinely set in stone, fixed.
And our sources point out how these feelings of being different often start really young.
So young. It might be just noticing your mother's heels and being drawn to them, or wanting to try on a dress.
Or just finding some comfort in these sort of secret moments of feeling feminine.
Exactly. But in many of these religious environments, that feeling gets met almost immediately with warnings. Sin, shame, God's anger.
Punishment even.
Yeah, divine punishment. And that's where this really painful split starts, this duality. The hidden life begins to take shape.
That psychological tug of war. It's so real. And we found this incredibly powerful personal story that just brings it home. This man, he cross-dresses privately, but he's also very active in his Lutheran church. And he said this, "I used to pray every night for God to take this away.
Wow.
I thought it was a curse. I thought I was sick.
That's heartbreaking.
But," he said, "the more I prayed, the more I felt like God wasn't angry. I was just afraid."
It's quite a realization, shifting the source of the judgment from God to his own fear.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How many people might be walking around feeling disconnected, feeling inauthentic because of these really rigid interpretations of faith?
And a lot of that fear, that guilt, it often gets traced back to specific scriptures, interpretations of scripture, really.
Like Deuteronomy.
Exactly. Deuteronomy 22.5 is the big one. "A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God."
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, that sounds pretty clear. Abomination is a strong word.
It is extremely strong. Seems unequivocal at first read.
But our sources suggest there's more to it. That maybe we need to look a bit deeper than the surface level.
Well, yes. Biblical scholars, they're quick to point out the context. This was written in a very specific cultural time and place.
Okay.
Clothing back then wasn't just about fashion. It was deeply tied to, tribal identity, religious rituals, keeping social order.
So cross-dressing might have meant something different then.
Potentially, yeah. It might have been associated with, say, pagan religious practices, or maybe intent to deceive, which is different from how many understand it today as personal expression or exploring identity.
That context piece is so critical, isn't it? It just changes the whole lens.
It really does.
And are there other examples in Deuteronomy that kind of reinforce this idea that context matters?
Oh, absolutely. If you look broader in Deuteronomy, you find other rules, like not wearing clothes made of mixed fabrics, linen and wool, for instance.
Right, I've heard that one.
Or not planting two different kinds of seed in the same field.
Things that, well, most modern believers just don't follow literally today.
Exactly. They're understood as cultural taboos specific to that time. So it begs the question, why treat Deuteronomy 22.5 differently?
If some parts are cultural, why aren't others?
Precisely. And while that word abomination still carries immense weight, just acknowledging that translation interpretation, they weren't perfect. They're human processes. that can open up space for reflection.
Yeah.
And many modern theologians are now arguing, quite forcefully actually, that the Bible doesn't give a blanket condemnation of cross-dressing as personal expression, especially, when the intent isn't to deceive or cause disruption, but it's about exploring identity or finding comfort or even appreciating beauty.
That feels like a really profound shift, moving away from just the strict letter of the law towards understanding intent.
It is a big shift.
And it reframes the whole conversation for a lot of people. So, okay, if the scriptural basis is being re-examined, what about the actual experience of faith?
Right.
Our sources show that for many cross-dressers, their spirituality isn't about ticking boxes in a doctrine. It's more like a living relationship,
A personal connection.
Yeah, a personal connection with the divine that doesn't always fit neatly into the institutional guidelines.
And what's really striking is that some cross-dressers actually report feeling closer to God when they're dressed in feminine clothing.
Closer, not separated.
Closer, a profound sense of presence, of love, of peace, not separation. We heard from one Catholic cross-dresser. She put it so beautifully.
What did she say?
She said, "I never feel more spiritually alive than when I'm dressed as Rachel." Rachel's her feminine.
Wow.
When I look in the mirror and see her, I see someone who is whole. I see the person God made me to be.
That's incredibly powerful. The person God made me to be. It flips the script entirely from sin to, authenticity.
It does.
And our sources bring up this really interesting theological point. If God is spirit, maybe our human understanding of gender, which is, let's face it, partly social, partly biological, maybe it's just one dimension of how we experience the divine, not a limit on it.
That's a fascinating idea, and there's actually support for that kind of thinking in various mystical traditions.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, think about Kabbalistic Judaism. There's this understanding of God having both masculine and feminine aspects, the Shekinah, for instance.
Yeah, right.
Or in Hinduism, you have deities that blend genders or shift gender roles quite fluidly.
Okay.
And even within Christian mysticism, figures like Julian of Norwich famously described Jesus using maternal language as a mother figure.
Huh. I didn't know that.
So this perspective suggests that maybe gender isn't this rigid spiritual box. Maybe it's more like a spiritual palette, as one source put it. Rich, varied, full of color.
A spiritual palette. I like that. It expands the view instead of confining it. But, okay, despite these more expansive views, these powerful personal experiences, the reality for many is still secrecy.
Unfortunately, yes. Secrecy is often still a survival strategy.
Because the fear of rejection is just so real. From family, from their congregation, maybe from their clergy.
And often that fear is justified. Rejection does happen.
Which leads to living these double lives. And you can just imagine the toll that takes. Isolation, shame, guilt.
So much emotional repression. It's a heavy burden.
And does this secrecy push people away from faith altogether?
Sometimes, yes. It can lead people to abandon religion entirely. They feel there's no place for them.
But not always.
Not always. For others, they start to realize the issue isn't necessarily the religion itself or God, but how it's been taught and practiced by people.
Making that distinction.
Yes. There was another really powerful quote about this. I thought I had to choose between God and my feminine side.
An impossible choice.
But then I realized it wasn't God who was judging me, it was people. Once I separated the two, I could start healing.
Separating God's judgment, or lack thereof, from human judgment. That seems absolutely crucial for healing.
It really is.
And the good news is, we are seeing shifts. There's a growing movement towards more inclusive faith communities.
Definitely. More and more LGBTQ plus affirming congregations are emerging, actively creating space for this kind of dialogue and acceptance.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. We're seeing this in denominations like the United Church of Christ, many Unitarian Universalist congregations, also some Methodist and Episcopal churches are moving in this direction, and groups like Reconstructionist Judaism as well.
So there are options, places people can look.
There are.
Are there similar movements in other faiths?
Yes, absolutely. We're seeing emerging scholarship in Islam, for instance. Figures like Dr. Amina Wadud are challenging strictly binary interpretations of gender within Islamic texts.
Okay.
And in Buddhism, the concept of gender fluidity is sometimes seen not as a problem, but potentially as part of the path towards enlightenment, towards non-attachment.
Wow. So these ancient traditions are being reread in ways that are much more expansive.
Incredibly so. It's quite exciting, theologically.
Now let's bring it back to the personal level, especially families. For many cross-dressers, particularly those in heterosexual marriages, faith, and family life are all tangled up together.
Deeply intertwined.
So coming out to a spouse, especially one who shares those religious values, our sources called it a minefield.
It absolutely can feel like that. The stakes are incredibly high, but it can also be an unexpected opportunity for growth.
How so?
Well, we heard from one wife of a crossdresser. They both attend church regularly. Her first reaction when he told her, pure confusion, she said. Fear.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wondering what it all means.
She wondered if he was turning into a woman, as she put it. Big questions about their marriage, their future.
That must have been terrifying.
It was. But she described this journey they went on involving prayer, counseling, and eventually she came to realize his faith hadn't changed.
Oh, okay.
He still prayed. He still loved God just as much. He just needed to be seen. His whole self.
His whole self, not just the part that fit the expected mold.
Exactly. She said it involved many tearful conversations, which you can imagine.
Oh, for sure.
But now, she says they're both more honest with each other and with God.
That's incredible, turning that potential crisis into deeper honesty.
It really highlights how an open, affirming partner can be like an anchor in that storm.
Yeah.
Not just helping navigate the spiritual questions, but actually modeling unconditional love, which,
It's supposed to be at the heart of most faiths, right?
Exactly, a core tenet.
So this kind of brings us to a really fundamental question, doesn't it? If faith is ultimately about things like love and justice and seeking truth, then if someone's feminine expression actually brings them closer to themselves, closer to other people, maybe even closer to the divine, how could that be anything but holy?
That's the pivotal question, isn't it? And what our deep dive really seems to show is that for many, cross-dressing isn't some act of rebellion against God.
Not at all.
Quite the opposite, in fact. For so many, it's a reaching towards authenticity. It's a practice of self-acceptance. It can even be a form of sacred embodiment.
Sacred embodiment. I like that framing. There was that one quote, if God knit you together in the womb.
Ah, yes. Then every thread of you, even the silken ones, is worthy of compassion and care.
Every thread.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And it really captures this sense of inherent worthiness.
It does. And look, this reconciliation, it's not simple. Spiritual journeys rarely are straight lines.
Definitely not easy.
But our sources are just filled with stories, countless stories of cross-dressers who are finding ways to integrate their faith and their identity. They're finding it possible to walk forward with, as one person put it, both heels and hope, makeup and meaning, mystery and belief.
Heels and hope.
Yeah.
Makeup and meaning. That's quite poetic.
Okay.
It suggests you don't have to choose.
It seems the divine might just be bigger than our closets, bigger than our categories.
A powerful thought to end on. The divine is bigger than our closets.